lounging, son.
Welcome back to the Comic Lounge. Another episode of Thought Balloon. My name's Ryan, and I have my co-host Jen with me. And today we're going to be talking about growing readership in comic books. It's a topic that has come up frequently between her and I. I've talked about it with other people that are part of the site, and it's definitely a topic that I think needs to be addressed, especially if we want to see the industry that, all of us that watch this or read comic books, we all want to see the industry survive. And I think the only way to do that is to grow the readership, not just amongst the older crowd, but especially with the youth. I think we're definitely seeing growth, especially in the YA market. Scholastic, I know as a dad that, even just going to the school book fair last year, it's amazing how many like graphic novels I'm seeing, especially with creators like Raina Telgemeier, Dave Pilkey, and, countless others. But there's definitely something that has been on my mind in terms of how to grow readership with a younger audience. And some have told me that, well, that's kind of maybe going back and thinking of, like going back to something that used to be, that maybe there's a reason it stopped. And that's being in like supermarkets, grocery stores and, like CVS, stuff like that. Right. And I disagree. I don't think that is a problem. I think that a lot of people my age and, maybe a little bit older than me, and maybe even just like a couple of years younger than me, discovered comics that way. I discovered comics not at a comic book store. I found it at the market. I found it at Walmart, or I found it at a 7-Eleven, stuff like that. And I think that, well, I know that it's not as cheap as it once was, so you can't just like go up to your parent, take the comic, like, oh, just add that to the thing. It's like $4 to $5, right? I do think that if they created something that was a little bit more affordable, that a parent would be more apt to, buying for their kid, I do think that it would be a way to introduce kids to comic books. I don't know how it is in Montreal, but I mean, out here, we still have Archie comic books at the check stand. Like when you're waiting in line to pay for your groceries, there's Archie. So they have to be making some money, or why the hell would they still be there? That's the way I'm looking at it. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they don't make a lot of money, but I think that DC kind of tried to do it with Walmart, but that pissed people off because you're not just being in Walmart, you're making it exclusive. So now you're creating another market where people are like speculating on a Walmart book and then driving up the price on eBay. What I think would be a great start, or maybe something to explore, would be for them to create a product that could be in comic book stores, like the stores have the ability to order, but something that is maybe a little bit more cost effective in grocery stores.
Maybe like a smaller, not a smaller, but like a, like you have a different, for example, you have DC, but you have DC Dark Label. So like a different label that's more, not beginner, but like consumer friendly, as of like you can start wherever you want, like a new to comic style label, something like that they can be everywhere in every stores.
Right. Yeah, and I think that, IDW does the Marvel Action comics, right, which are geared to young kids, but still they're $4 a piece. And I think because look, like the Scooby-Doo and Looney Tunes comics that that DC puts out, they've been going for like years. I mean, they're on issue like 200 and something, $2.99 price. They have to be selling somewhere, or why would they publish them still? That's my first thought, right? Second thought is, okay, if you're making it $2.99, so why not create a $2.99 line of comic books, not a lot of titles, and start putting those in grocery stores?
Image Comics, they came up with a $1, the first issue $1 thing,
right,
of their bestseller. That, I mean, it was everywhere for a while.
I mean, you could do that as well, but I was thinking more in terms of creating something that people, like kids, could get at a comic book store where it would be continuing, right? But that also comic book stores would want to carry. Like my store doesn't carry the dollar comics. They'll buy sometimes the Image first or whatever. Like we'll let somebody buy that, and then if they like it and they bring it back, we'll give them a discount on the trade, right? But like the DC Marvel, when they put out those dollar reprints, we don't carry them. But I think that if and like especially like with kids, like don't just give them reprints. Give them something new, something that is going to excite them. Like they have the cartoons on TV. Create a line of those comic books, or even create something just a little more all age friendly, and put them in stores. I mean, magazines are still a thing, so if magazines are still in stores, they have to be selling. Otherwise, why are they there? So try comic books again. I think it would be a good avenue, in my opinion.
But it's funny because when I was younger, I don't remember. I think it was called Spirou. It's a magazine style, but it was comic strip inside. But it wasn't just comic strips. It was like about comics. So you had like interviews with comic writers. You had, but like everything French. It was a European comic, and it was my favorite. It was $1. It was at the dollar store. We could find it at the dollar store here in Montreal. I think it's still going. I'm not sure, but it was really nice because that's something that I was excited for, like going to the dollar store and pick up a new Spirou magazine. And it was just, I guess that, I like this idea because that's how it kept me going. Because even if it was just little comic strips, like um, how do you call that? Four, not square, but you know what I mean? Really like a strips
Mm-hmm.
of 3 or 4, like a Garfield style, but
Right.
everything was from French comics. And it was just really fun and interesting. It was kind of like what got me a little bit into comics because it was different stories but different characters, different writers, different artists. So it's a nice way to like expand the world. So I agree that we really need something like that. Maybe not like a comic, maybe a magazine, maybe something like a mix, a hybrid of both, but something that really keeps going and that we can sell in supermarkets or stuff like that. But I also like the idea. I'm really jealous because in Walmart here, we don't carry those new DC comics.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it would be nice to go to Walmart and just purchase comics, like even if it's exclusive or something. I understand why people are mad because of the exclusivity, but without being exclusive, maybe like I said, another label that's targeted for supermarket slash Walmart slash dollar store consumers. And it's all about
Mm-hmm.
marketing, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, look, my whole point of it too, and like this is my main argument, right? Like, you can't expect a kid or a parent to just magically come to a comic book store and discover comic books. It's just not going to happen. Like,
That's in the movies.
just because they're watching a Marvel movie, they're not going to be like, ooh, there must be a store with books with these characters in it. No, man. Like, not everybody pays attention to that. I'm just remembering as a kid, right? Like with my mom, like I would discover new books, new characters from there. There would be like 20 to 20, like, okay, not 20 25, like 15 to 20 different comic books in the magazine section.
Yeah.
There'd be Flash, there'd be Batman, Nightwing, Spider-Man, like all sorts of stuff that I would discover. Not indie stuff, but the superhero stuff. And that's where kids are going to start. They're going to start with superhero stuff, and then they will graduate to indie. That's how it is. I mean, how often do you see an indie comic that's made for a kid? You don't, unless it's an all ages comic or YA, which I guess you could call that indie. But when I think of indie, I'm thinking of like, Image, Boom, all that stuff, Vault, and publishers like that. But it blows me away that they left that on the table, like just like they took it out of stores. I don't even know when it happened, to be honest with you. I don't even remember. But why not try it? What is it going to hurt? You know what I mean? Like you're taking a risk, but isn't every comic book you put out a risk? When you put it out to a comic book store, that's a
Yeah, of
risk.
course.
There's no guarantee that it's going to sell. So instead of doing that stupid Walmart exclusive, why aren't we thinking about like, okay, let's not do an exclusive. Let's try out a couple titles and have it available for all these stores. If the stores order, they order. If they don't, they don't. But if they're already willing to order Archie comic books, why wouldn't they be willing to order a Spider-Man or Captain Marvel or a
Maybe it's a
Black
price
Panther, stuff
point.
like
I don't know how much are Archie
dude,
selling.
they're $4.99.
Oh.
For a little digest, it's like this size, it's like a pocketbook. But if they're willing to sell like $7 magazines, $15 magazines, like dude, I don't want to spend $15 magazine on fucking one mute like a tribute issue to like Janis Joplin or a tribute issue to the Beatles. Like, get the fuck out. Like, so why can't you have a $4 comic book or $5 comic book? I'm not gonna spend $16.99 on a magazine. That's ridiculous. I will just go look online and read about them. Like if it's $5, okay, but so that's just one of the things that I think. I do think that, like I said with the YA stuff, I think that is a step in the right direction. And especially with Scholastic, I know I'm waiting to see what Marvel's going to do because they just signed a deal with Scholastic to produce some titles through them, kind of like what DC's doing themselves with the DC, the young readers stuff.
Yeah.
So about that, but I don't see why all publishers aren't doing it. I don't see why Image doesn't have an all ages or doesn't cater to that as well, because that's
Okay, I have a question then. So could it be that if it's driven, like if you can find those comics, like those Marvel, DC, Image comics only in comic store, is it possible that the market is doing that for driving up the prices? Because it's a little bit more exclusive if you can only find them in comic store. So they're really rare or exclude like a limited editions of certain comics. The price go higher faster because you can only purchase them at certain places. If they are everywhere, the prices will, like this whole black market of comics is gonna go lower. No?
I don't see how that would really happen. I mean, let's just look back to when stuff was in grocery stores and was in on newsstands and was in 7-Eleven, right? The sales numbers were higher.
Oh yeah.
Substantially. Like if you look at like an average comic book, what it sold when I was a kid, and I know that this is like kind of like when I told you like the speculator market, the
Yeah.
big bubble of right. Um, Look at the numbers then to now. Like a comic book selling 100,000 copies now is considered a huge win. 100,000 copies sold when I was a kid was considered a failure.
Mm.
You know what I mean? That's just to kind of give you some context. So that just shows you that the numbers are not what they used to be. And if you limit where you're selling it, you're limiting how much you can sell.
Yeah.
That's my whole thing, right? So if you like, it'd be like, I don't even know how to, I don't even know. Okay, look, it'd be like a restaurant, right? With all these like Uber Eats and DoorDash and Postmates, all that stuff, right? If you don't do any of those, to me that's lost revenue. If you open yourself up where I can order delivery from you and not have like I'll be more inclined to go there if I don't really feel like driving that night. So
Yeah.
that's more revenue. So it's just stuff like that. It's just ways to like expand
I
and
totally
bring in.
agree with you. No, I totally agree with you. I mean, it would be really great for the market and the industry to have um, more selling points and more. I mean, it would be great, like you said. Like we discussed this in the previous video. We said that in order for the industry to keep going, we have to find ways to have more different readers and maybe the younger audience also, because the younger audience is going to grow up, and if they don't want to read comics while growing up, the industry is just going to collapse, right? So I think the way that what you're saying would be a really great way um like pull in these different readers, like those readers that don't really know about comics, they don't know about characters. It's the people like me, the people who don't go to Marvel, like a comic store, and they don't understand why there's so many Marvel and DC characters and where to start. Having these comics maybe a little bit simpler and maybe just a little bit easier to reach, it will help these people who are not sure where to start to actually start. And we're gonna be able to grow a bigger audience and a different audience also. It will be different than having all those people who are like stuck with the old ways of doing comics. And I mean, I think it will solve a lot of problems, especially it will solve a lot of, we will have more diversity in the readership, we will have more accessibility in the readership, it will be really great. And like also, like you said, comics is really expensive. So it would be really nice if they ever target against supermarket and stuff like that to have a lower price, like you said, because especially if we target younger audience. And yeah, I think that it would be really great. I'm just curious as to why they don't do it or why they don't do it anymore. I'm just
that's always been a question I've had, and I've I really like I'm really trying to figure out like who I could talk to that's been in the industry long enough or that has worked with a publisher that's really major that could answer that question, because I do want to ask that. I've kind of tried to ask creators, but like they don't know because they're not really the ones that are on that side of the industry. So it's definitely like I like Paul Levitz, who was publisher at DC. I'm trying to chat with him again because that's something I want to ask him. I know he's not doing it now, but he would know. He would have to know that answer to that question. But like they could also like print the comics on a little bit cheaper of paper, even, print it on like the newsprint, like it was.
Especially if it's targeted for younger audience. I mean, they don't need this super like
it doesn't need to be
quality
this
paper.
exactly, and then it's a little bit cheaper to print, and then it doesn't cost you as much. I know that would be something. I think also commercials, like all these comic book movies, all these comic book shows and cartoons, like throw up a fucking commercial advertising comic books.
But
Like
you know
I
what would
don't
be really
understand.
great? Throw one of those commercials before any of those comic-based TV shows or movies. Most of the
Yeah,
time, for example, especially on Netflix, most of the time people watch TV shows on Netflix and they don't even know it's based on comic books.
yeah,
How could I'm not into really TV or movie adaptation, but how, like, what's the whole point of doing a TV show adaptation is to for the audience to know that it comes from comic book, and then having this audience doing reading comic books, right? That's the whole point of doing this like crossover adaptations thing. But if we don't even know that it's based on comic books, it's impossible to, like, people are not curious. People won't go googling Lock and Key and figuring out where it starts and who publishes and stuff like that. People are not curious like that. And yes, of course, it says like based on the story written by, but nobody reads that. Nobody cares. Like, you don't watch, when you watch a TV show or movie, you don't read those little like teeny
yeah,
tiny letters on the screen that are last like 0.1 second on the screen, and then the story starts. Like, it'd be nice to have maybe not commercial, but like maybe, like pictures or like a video or something of like showing the comic versus the TV show. Like once, for example, TV shows would be like the last episode could be how they adapted the comic book for, how they adapted the TV show for the comic book, and like stuff like that. It would be really cool, I think, to target that audience too.
yeah,
Because it happens really often that I talk to people, I'm like, that this TV show is based on a comic book, right? And they're like, oh no, I didn't know about that. I'm like, yeah,
yeah.
that's the whole point.
Yeah, I know it's stuff like Umbrella Academy, Old Guard. I mean, even like a movie like History of Violence or Road to Perdition, those started out as graphic novels. And not a lot of people know that because they're like, oh, comic books are superheroes. No, no, they're not.
Exactly.
They're a lot more than that, and that's why people don't know. But I'm thinking more in terms also like these Marvel movies. I know there's no movies right now, because the theaters are shut down. Um, but if they're selling, if they're making $1 billion off that movie, right? And you're not trying to capitalize on that audience and bring them into comic books, I don't get it. Like people constantly will be like, oh, well, man, that movie did good. So you guys must be making a lot of money at the comic book store. No. It just because people go to watch the movie doesn't mean they're magically, like I said earlier, doesn't mean they're magically going to go to a comic book shop and be like, oh, I got to read this comic book. It's not how it works. And I think that even, we're talking about like for kids too. I think maybe creating a line of comic books, especially with Marvel, because if you
Mm.
go see a Marvel movie and then you go try to read the comic book, 9 times out of 10, it's not gonna match up. The Guardians of the Galaxy that you're seeing in the movie is not the Guardians of the Galaxy that you see in the comic book. The Spider-Man that's in high school, he's not in high school in the comic books. He's a grown man. You know what I mean? So like, there's stuff like that that I think would also be beneficial to kind of like once you got him, once you hook them, then you have them, and then that's when you show them other stuff. I do think that um, I think that we also, in terms of growing more of a diverse group of readership, need to make sure that everybody is being represented in comic books. And we kind of talked about that when we were talking about women in comic books. I think we also kind of touched on representation, but I think representation too is key. I think that, they have the ability to do that in Marvel and DC. And I think that like a character like Morales is a perfect example, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's half Puerto Rican and half black, and they didn't do it in a way that like, oh, we're gonna introduce a black Spider-Man. It was a natural progression of a story, and the way he was introduced. I know you don't read it, but like I went back and read. I didn't read it when it came out. I went back and read it, and there's ways to do it like that that feel natural that will let somebody latch on to stuff. The way they did Thor and they made Thor a woman was like it was natural in the story. It wasn't like, okay, we're gonna give a woman a hammer and she's Thor now. No, like they created a really intriguing story, and to be honest with you, the issues of Thor where Jane Foster was Thor were some of my favorite of the entire run. Not the original Thor. Like I liked the ones where she had the hammer. I thought that it was really interesting. And I think that they also need to work on that too, and kind of give a voice to the voiceless. Like you have the characters, use them. Like a Shang-Chi is a new book that just came out from Marvel. There's not a lot of Asian characters represented at Marvel. He's like one of the few, and they just launched that book, and it was phenomenal. And they could have marketed it a little bit better, but whatever. Like I'm not gonna I'm not gonna sit here and like talk shit about the marketing department. There's so much wrong with that, but I think that they also need to do that as well. We need to see, you know, so yeah, like the LGBTQ community and all races, like all this stuff needs to be taking place in order for people to be able to identify too. It can't just be it can't just be white male or even white female, or it can't just be, okay, well now there's the Black Lives Matter movement is happening. Oh, we better get some black characters out there. No, you guys need to just do it in a way that doesn't feel like you're smacking me in the face with it. Make it have it be natural and not natural. Just tell genuine stories. You know what I mean?
Yes,
Don't try to
but
force it.
I mean, I've been saying this for a long time. If you go outside Marvel and DC, it's much, much, much easier to find that diversity. If you go in indie brands and indie comics, it's so much easier. But it all comes to Marvel and DC not stepping up their game in terms of diversity and having, sorry, but shitty marketing. They have shit marketing. They're not able to stand up for themselves. I mean, I don't understand why they are so big in 2020, honestly. Because I guess that they are so big because they are the oldest. So they have a really old and really loyal readership. But honestly, if they don't change their game, they're not going to be able to keep up with the younger audience and the younger readers. That's my personal opinion, because if you go into Image Comics or Boom, even Boom this year has been like incredible. They're pulling out incredible new series and stuff like that, and
Mm-hmm.
they have a lot more diversity and they have a much better marketing. And I don't know, that's just for me. I feel like the problem is mostly from the big two, but that's something that I've been repeating again and again.
Yeah, I know. I know that the big two is a main factor, but it needs to start with the big two because,
Mm.
like I said, like you're not going to discover comic books as a kid going and picking up an issue of Saga or going and picking up an issue of Spawn or an issue of, you know, something is killing the children. Like it's just not going to happen. They Marvel and DC are where kids are going to start.
But
Or
Boom have really great kids stories. They have really great kids comics, and I don't know why we don't talk about them more because they are really cool. And even Image Comics, when they came out with their it's called Norway or something like that, and it's based on um an old tale, but it's targeted for kids, and it was nominated for an Eisner Award, I think. But if they were able to pull off more of these titles, it would be really great.
yeah, I guess you're right. Like Boom Box is what it's called, right?
Yes,
I think.
exactly.
Yeah, they Boom does have. You're right. Boom does have a lot of good stuff. But again, like no, little kids aren't. Little kids will could only discover that if it's in like a Scholastic book fair, right?
Yeah.
Or I guess at a bookstore. Um, but the majority of young kids know who Spider-Man is, know who Batman is, and it's there that kids will have an easier way to discover comic books.
It's true.
I do think that Boom should probably have because I know that I didn't see any Boom stuff at the book fair, but there is titles that they could have there. I think Lumberjanes is part of Boombox, right?
Yes.
Then they have like you have stuff like Mouse Guard, and you have
Yes.
like Go Sit in L.A. I think is good for maybe middle school. I think middle school would be where that would probably be a little bit more appropriate. But yeah, they do have stuff like that. Image, I don't think has as much. I think Image has like even Inkblot could have been kind of for kids, but there's a couple cuss words in there, I think.
It's
So
a little bit violent. There's a lot of like fighting and battles.
yeah, and then I think that like on first look, I hate Fairyland. You might think that
No.
that's for kids. No, but I'm saying like a kid could look at that and be like, oh, maybe I get, or a parent be like, I'll buy that for my kid. Like, no, you can't do that. So I think that just continuing to grow a line of books for a young audience, exploring different avenues on where to have these books is really the only way. I don't think it's just marketing. I think that like if you were to just take product and put it in their face somewhere, people are going to discover it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they have kids books at the market, so throw some comic books there too, you know?
And you know what's also really interesting? When you said that in your face, I thought about that. I had a history teacher when I was in high school, and at the beginning of every class, there was a 15 minutes mandatory reading period, and she had a really huge bookshelf, and half of it was historical comics, and it was really great because there is a lot, but a lot of historically based comics out there in the indie department, of course, and not just comic, but graphic novels. For me, it's the same thing. But and it's really great if we could. I don't know how. Like this is again my super positive attitude, but imagine if we could come up with a partnership program with schools where comic books and graphic novels will be available for those students. It would be super interesting to target that audience also. And you know, I'm really in one of my thing to read is like a we call it in French docu-BD. It's like a documentaries comics, like something that's based on like historical facts, but it's really close to like when reading a historical book, but instead of just letters, there you have like comic strips and pictures, and you basically it's partnership with an artist. And I feel that's really interesting because it's another way to discover history. Or I just finished a Montreal-based comic books. It's a study of suicides in Montreal from 18 something to 1978. and
Mhm.
it's like all the facts and all like this really like just really all the study they made but in a comic book, and that's really great as well because you could maybe not that subject suicide is really dark, but there's a lot of comic books talking about subjects like um, science or history and stuff like that that you could implement into a school, and that would be really great.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said that because First Second, I don't know if you're familiar with that publisher, but
A little bit.
they did like books like This One Summer with Mariko Tamaki. They've
Yeah.
done a lot of Genia. Okay, so like they've created a line of, like you said, graphic novels that talk about science, history, specific historical events and stuff like that. And I do think that that is a great way. And I think that if teachers could somehow begin to implement that into their curriculum, I think not only would kids maybe gravitate towards it more because it's a different way of learning and where you're like looking at a comic book, it kind of makes it fun, but it will also like it has the ability to make them seek out other stuff. I know college does a lot of courses where I mean, they even have comic book courses. You know, like somebody came in the other day and showed me the curriculum
Yeah.
from the class, and they have like Odyssey by Matt Fraction. They had Jane Foster's Thor. I think Watchmen was on there too, and like stuff
It's
like
funny
that.
because my one of my comic store near me, they like every when a new school year starts, they have a stand in the entrance because there's a college nearby. So the stand is like, if you are with this teacher, these are the books from your curriculum, and he puts the like the books for the curriculum depending on the teacher because he's affiliated with the school and he knows what teacher is going to present what comic book. And when I saw that, I was like, this is so great. Like, it's so
Yeah.
cool. And I think we need more of that because that's a really nice way. First of all, I think part of the problem is that there are still people snobbing comics. You know, like ooh, like comics, like you don't
Hmm.
like to read, like it's just pictures and stuff like that. But if we are able to change that image of comic books to something more um, like literary, like something more about literature, because it's part of literature, it's part of art, it's part of being able to analyze not only the writing but also the visual art and stuff like that. So that would be really great to change that image and having a different audience. Again, it's all about audience, right?
Right. I agree. And you know what? And we've been spending most of the time talking about growing the audience with younger readers, which is how I think the industry will continue to grow past our generations, right?
Of course.
But also people our age, like you said, like, oh, I didn't know that was based on a comic book. Again, like I've noticed people that have come into the store that took a class, oh, graphic novel course at the college, right? And then they ended up discovering other stuff. Like and like she's older than me. She probably, I'd say in her mid 40s. And picked up Saga because she was in the shop. She's like, oh, I took this class and, you know, do you have any recommendations? I'm like, yeah, go read this. Just trust me, you know? And then she came in like every week for the next for the next volume until she caught up. And I think that that's another cool avenue too, is to grow the readership that even as adults that maybe they didn't read comics as kids, because not everybody, even my age, read comic books as a kid. But I think that, and I think a lot, like more recently than not, I'm noticing people in their 20s and maybe early 30s that are reading comic books for the first time that never read comic books before, and now they're interested. And there, since there is such a wide variety of stories that we're seeing in graphic novels and comic books, adults are able to get into it at an older age. And I do think that, like you said, would be beneficial too for people watching Netflix shows. Yeah, throw something up on there and let them know that, oh, this was a comic book, because a lot of people discovered Old Guard because of that.
Yeah, I
I can't.
discovered Old Guard because of that.
Yeah, like I love Greg Rucka. He's one of my favorite writers. I mean, I absolutely love everything he does. And it was cool to see, and like he was a huge part of the promotional thing. So like he wrote the script for the movie. That's rare. We don't get to see that, right?
Yeah.
So I think that if people, especially knowing that, they're like, oh, he writes the comic book and he wrote the movie, that's a good selling point also. And I think that, I like what you said about the college classes, how your shop, he has this thing there. I tried to do that. I was like, dude, we should do that at the shop because we have a teacher that works at a college that's probably like not even 2 miles, like a mile and a half away from the shop. And I was like, we need to create a section of all the books that he's teaching, man. You know what I mean? Like, just create it. And then, like, that's also promoting his class for people that don't know about it. And then that's just going to create more fucking revenue for the shop. And I think that I love that teachers are definitely utilizing it. And it's not just in comic book centric classes.
No, it's not just like about it's not just about like a I don't know how to say that word, like literature.
Literature.
It's not just about that. If I remember correctly, one of the book was V for Vendetta, and it was for a philosophy class to analyze like
Yeah.
society and stuff like that. And I thought it was really smart and great because it's so different of I think it was an intro to philosophy class or something like that. And it was really interesting to see that. It's not just classes about comic books. It's like classes that everyone take once in a while. Well, I mean, here you have to take philosophy and literature class if you want to do your other classes. So it's mandatory. So it's nice to have those important classes like stepping up into the comic game.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that people should be recognizing it as literature. It's comic books are not just for kids. Comic books should be also geared towards kids. We shouldn't forget that comic books should be for kids as well, which I think has been forgotten over the last few years. I think they're starting to try to correct that a little bit. But comic books are for everybody. There is so much in the industry, and there's so much there. If you look at Watchmen's on and Sandman, right? Those are two perennials. That's literature. That is not a kid book. You know what I mean? Like, there is so much depth to those stories, and you can spend so much time analyzing. You could literally have a full course on Watchmen. You could have a full course on Sandman, and I think that I think it should be. I definitely think it should be utilized more in schools, from elementary school to middle school to high school. All that stuff. That would also be, and if publishers partnered up with the schools and tried to like promote it as like, oh, this could be taught for this class. Like, there's just so much that I think that maybe that falls more into marketing too.
I think it falls into marketing, but I mean, my teacher in high school, my history teacher in high school, she purchased every single book from her own pocket. I mean,
oh wow,
she shared with her students her own collection, and it was really beautiful to see. And I'm still thankful for that, because I remember it's a French series. It's called Murena, and it's about Rome, but like Jules Caesar and Brutus, and like all these historical facts and characters. And although it's a little bit fiction, like of course you have romance and you have fiction in it, it's nice because and read those comics and catch up with your like having your history class, and like being able to associate these fictional characters in the comic book with real life character, and you're able to understand the differences between this is fiction and this is reality, and it's another way to analyze information. And it's something that you need when you grow up. It's to be able to analyze fictive information that you can see on social media and real information that you can find somewhere else, and it's just a different way to grow up and a different way to being able to analyze. And that's something great about that too. If you're able to implement comic books and stuff like that into a school curriculum, it just helps your kids and your students to develop this analyzing
analytical mind.
Exactly.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that, I mean, I don't really have, I mean, that's pretty much all I have in terms of how to grow readership, based on just my own experience growing up as a kid, and based on what I'm seeing, working in a shop, kind of like as I analyze the way the industry is kind of running right now. But is there anything else that you kind of want to add in terms of what you think?
not add, because I think we covered everything. I'm just really curious if someone that watches us and listen to us is able, like with a marketing degree or something like that, who's
Yeah.
able to like tell us why or why not they are doing what they're currently doing. Is there a reason behind it, or is it just because it's the way that it always used to be and it's how they keep doing it? But if that's the case, why don't we like change things up a little bit and adapt to the current climate that is 2020? And I just want to know from a marketing point of view how it works, how is this whole industry working right now? Because it's a lot of we have a lot of good, I think we have a lot of good suggestions and answers,
Yeah.
but it's all about um, being able to take action from the publishers and the industry, and why they are not taking action in this way, in this direction. So I think it's just, yeah, I'm just curious about that. So if anyone has an answer, please
Yes,
write us.
yes, please write in. Throw your comments or suggestions down below, or you can also email us at thecomicloungepod@gmail.com. Make sure you follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at The Comic Lounge. Follow Jen at Life of a Geeky Mind on Instagram as well. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video goes up. We also have an audio podcast on Podbean, Spotify, and iTunes. And on that note, we're out.